My name is Skelton, and I am one of the co-founders of Driving While Awesome, an automotive podcast. I also am a co-founder of the RADwood car show, 80s and 90s car shows, and just an all-around gearhead. Went to school for automotive design, and cars are my life.
I roughly know where you're at because I listen to the show as well, but my memory is so terrible that I'm not. I know it's in the 300s, and you mentioned something in the 300s, right?
Yeah, I think we've done 385 episodes.
Jesus.
Right around there.
You guys are machines.
You know, two a week for the last 2 years. And once a week before that. And we've been doing it for around 4.5 years, a little more.
I am impressed, to say the least.
Yeah, we're no Mark Green, but, you know.
Oh, yeah. So I had him on the show. I mean, that is the machine. Like, you ever heard of Bert Kreischer?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so Bert Kreischer. Machine. I kind of want to, email Bert Kreischer and be like, hey, listen, man, you're an imposter. Here's the real machine. It's Mark Green of Cars, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, an episode a day that guy does. That's insane.
Yeah, it's nuts.
So you're up in Santa Cruz doing this remotely with me. Tell me about Santa Cruz, because in a way, it's kind of like Los Angeles, where you have the ocean and you have the mountains. So a lot of great opportunities for car stuff.
Yeah, so Santa Cruz it's right on the ocean. I'm three or four blocks away from the ocean.
Nice.
And, but the mountains are, 12 blocks away.
Okay.
So the Santa Cruz Mountains are right here, and those are some of the best driving roads in the United States, I would say.
So that people understand, and not to give too much away, because I don't want to ruin your driving experience up in Santa Cruz.
Uh-huh.
Monterey, obviously, car mecca once a year. And also, aside from that portion in August where it's car week, it's still kind of car mecca. It's really close to Laguna Seca. There's insane amount of roads through Monterey. And Santa Cruz is pretty close. I mean, relatively close, right?
Yeah, 40 minutes.
Yeah, so you guys are kind of sort of sharing like roads, and where do you think the roads are better?
Monterey doesn't hold a candle to the roads up here, but it definitely has some roads out there, towards the valley and stuff. And there's, obviously Highway 1 is, one of the best driving roads in the world if you can get a clear run at it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Santa Cruz Mountains, like, there's so many roads. It's crazy. Like, you could take one road, for example, you take Skyline Boulevard up to Alice's, and there's 30 roads left and right off of that you can take down the mountain on either side, towards the ocean or towards the valley. And those have all these fingers going off of them, and it's just, you can go explore those roads for 6 days and not see it all.
That's amazing.
It's a crazy amount of stuff.
Should I beep the Skyline and the other road out so that you are not giving away too many secrets?
No. Skyline is definitely a everyone knows about it kind of thing. So it's the little ones off of that people don't really, unless you're from here,
sure,
or unless you live here, you don't really explore.
Sure. So was that your stomping ground when you were in high school? Because I know that you have a pretty kind of historied past with cars and in high school and so on. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in high school, it's funny because when you're in high school, I feel like you don't really venture that far away from where you live.
Sure.
Especially for driving. So in high school, I grew up in Santa Cruz, and my first two cars were little Volkswagen Rabbits. And I souped them up and put the new speed license plate frames on and did all that stuff.
Nice.
And and then I had a 914 in high school as well. And the roads that we would drive were actually just right in the Santa Cruz Mountains, just right here, like 5 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. And it's up towards the mystery spot.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of back roads out there, Old San Jose Road, and going off of those roads that we would just do, it'd be one of those things where on a Thursday night at midnight, a friend and I would just go out and drive. Like, I would call him up. he had I'm thinking of one particular friend. He had a 68 911T. I had a 74 914, and we would just go drive for an hour and a half from midnight till 1:30, and drive on the back roads of Santa Cruz Mountains. And then we had a bunch of other friends with cool, TR3s and BMW 2002s and E30 M3, like all kinds of cool stuff. So it was a really fun place to grow up and to be into these little sports cars, because you could actually exploit the handling and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you guys are doing it right up in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
It's crazy. 914s and T's. You guys had some pretty impressive cars back in high school. So
yeah, and they weren't expensive though. So I'm 38 years old, and like those cars, my 914 was $1,000 and was really nice. My friend's 911T was a $4,000 car, and it had a brand new paint job and was a really cool car.
Nice.
M3 was a $12,000 car, for an E30 M3.
Sure.
So it was just, and that was like, that guy was balling because he had a $12,000 car. So
Yeah.
it's just, it's funny how, and Santa Cruz is not a very like flamboyant place. So, you were talking about like the hippie culture and stuff like that of UCSC. And that's kind of, Santa Cruz was always like the hippie kind of, if you were wealthy, you had a Volvo. And if you were middle class, you had a Volvo.
Okay.
And if you're poor, you had a Volvo.
Got it.
So, and now that has switched to Subarus. So everyone just has a Subaru, right? It's
Interesting.
the non-pretentious kind of quasi-luxury, step below the BMW and the Mercedes, but...
Got it. I'm assuming 240s?
Yeah, 240s, of course.
Yeah.
And, I have 740s snuck in.
Nice. That guy must have been balling out of control.
Yeah, my dad had a 740 turbo wagon that I would sneak out at night.
Oh, man.
So, and that rear-wheel drive with a turbo was pretty fun.
Nice. The talk of the town. So did you stick around Santa Cruz after high school?
So I actually went to Cuesta Community College in San Luis Obispo, and I had a bunch of friends that were going to Cal Poly and stuff, so I moved down there after like one semester of Cabrillo in Santa Cruz, and then I went up to the Art Academy in San Francisco and did automotive design.
Okay. With the intention of doing what?
With the intention of being a car designer.
Okay.
But I was, I don't know, I kind of fizzled out slowly, I would say. I was there for a year and a half, and I had another 6 months left, and I was just found myself kind of not motivated, and I don't think the program was where it probably is today. It was a really fresh program, and I don't think the wheels weren't really rolling very well, and there was a lot of like questionable teachers and stuff like that. It was just, I had one specific moment where we did just a model making project, essentially, where we had to work on surfaces. And I did this, basically you make like almost like a vase kind of thing, but it's doing surfaces and then doing paint and showing the lines and stuff like that. So I painted mine, and then I brought it in, and the teacher's like, "How did you get it so smooth and perfect?" And I said, "Oh, I just color sanded it and polished it." And he goes, "What's color sanding?"
Oh, wow.
And at that point, I was just kind of like, I remember looking at him saying, "What?" And he's like, "What's color sanding?" I'm like, like where you sand it with like 2,500 or 3,000 grit paper and then polish it. Wait, you sanded it after you painted it? And I'm like, oh, okay. And that was kind of like the slow end of me, kind of not being into it. And then I had some opportunities and I left.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of, I don't even know how to say this, but that's almost like a bullet through the chest.
Yeah, it was pretty hard because I had already been there for a year and a half, and it was just kind of like, man, is this all worthless? It made me like look at everything and just kind of question it. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, because the school itself has a pretty damn good reputation, but the program, it just sounds like wasn't up to snuff.
Yeah, this was this was only maybe a year or two in of the automotive design program there.
Got it.
And at the time, they had just got Tom Matano as the director.
Okay.
So he was the head designer for Mazda, and he designed the Mazda Miata, the original NA Miata.
Mm-hmm.
He did like the MPV minivans. Good, big reputation, right? Quoting what's her name, but it just wasn't kind of up to snuff, and I bet it's kind of getting there, but art center's always been where it's at.
Sure. Before we kind of jump into everything else, I mean, my question is, why car design? Obviously there's a certain enthusiasm that you have, especially growing up in car culture, where it's almost like, I don't know. I think every kid at one point in time wants to be a car designer, because if you're into cars, you're probably into cars really early. Yeah. And if you're into cars really early, you've probably had a notepad, a doodle pad, the back of your hand, whatever you could get a pencil, a marker, or whatever onto, and you probably did some kind of a sketch of a car, if not tracing cars. Yeah. I remember being a little kid and getting Car and Driver magazines at my dad's shop and taking paper and putting it on the screen of old school tube televisions and using the light from that to trace F40s and 959s and so on and so forth. So what was the logic behind making this something that you were going to pursue?
I was actually interning for the city of Santa Cruz in doing AutoCAD for them, and it was a lot of it was like low level design work, I would say. So it's like curbs and gutters and stuff. So a lot of boring kind of measurements, like just like doing the standard plans for a gutter, right? And I was doing that for the city, and I was looking at what I could do, and throughout my whole life, like you said, it was always, I had always been an artist. I was always drawing. I was always, at this time, I had already painted 5 cars, and art was always like my passion, right? So when my friends were out playing in the yard and stuff, out in the street, I would be at the table drawing for, 8 hours, and I look forward to rainy days so I can just sit there and doodle and draw and sketch. Mm-hmm. But so the opportunity just kind of came about, and I had heard that Art Academy had this program, and I basically jumped on it, and I kind of did everything I could to go and make it happen. And it didn't work out, but I'm glad I did it. So
that's good that you come out with your experience in a positive light.
There is positives. Like, I did learn some stuff, and we had, like, I remember this one, we did some drawings and stuff, and we had them reviewed by Chris Bangle. Mm-hmm. And it was some cool stuff like that, but for the most part, not the greatest.
You ventured out and you stuck to cars, right? You didn't really leave the four-wheeled genre. So you went to work, I think, for Subaru, right?
I did. Nice. Wow, you know your stuff.
I do my little bit of research. Google's a pretty handy tool, I got to tell you.
Yeah. So I actually, part of the reason I was, left the Art Academy was that I had an opportunity to get this house with my brother, and we spent 9 months remodeling this house and turning it into like several units and doing a bunch of work on it. So we did that, and then we actually lived in that house, and we had all these kids renting rooms and stuff like that, and it was kind of a cool experience as well. So just doing all this construction for a year on this house and making it from a kind of crappy house into something really neat. Mm-hmm. And then when that was done, I needed a job, and I didn't know what I was going to do really. And I didn't want to go back to school. And I had a friend working at the Subaru dealership. So I went to work for Subaru. I was just, knowing it was like a temporary thing. And I just went there as a salesman, became the internet manager, and worked there for a year selling Subarus. And that was an eye-opening experience. You know, it was really stressful for me because I'm not a person. I just have a hard time like not being 100% truthful. And I think a lot of times like people, they almost don't want to be told the truth. And it's kind of weird. And they look at like everyone that comes into a car dealership, they look at you like you're the enemy.
Sure.
And I totally get that too, because the most stressful times I've had in the last 10 years is buying 4 new cars, you know? So I hate it with a passion. It's like, if this whole system is just flawed. But yeah, so I did that, worked there for a year. And during my time there, I was doing a little bit of I did a little bit of graphic design work here and there for friends and some companies and stuff like that. Ended up doing some graphic design for a friend of a friend's brother's carbon fiber company that he was starting from his home called MA Carbon. And I did some like brochures for him and logo stuff and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then I was asked to come on board there when he moved the company out of his 3rd bedroom into a real facility. And I was there for the last 10 years, growing that business from basically, you know, a $200,000 a year business to like a $2 million a year business.
Wow.
And then I recently left that job, and I guess I'm skipping a lot of steps with DWA and everything. But yeah, I came and started doing DWA and RADwood full time.
Yeah, we'll get to DWA. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
You are Lane Skelton, co-founder of DWA.
I am. There's a lot of co-founders, by the way. There's like 7 of us.
Before we go into RADwood and before we go into all the stuff that you guys are doing, let's talk driving while awesome. Let's talk about the idea, how it came about, how you guys put this whole thing together, why you even put this together. 4 years ago, podcasting was different. I mean, it was a different world. There weren't as many shows. There wasn't as much noise. And it wasn't really one of those things where people were like, you got to go into podcasting like it is right now. It's like everybody and their mom are going into podcasting. Let's talk about the infancy stages of Driving While Awesome. Why did you even call it Driving While Awesome?
So, Driving While Awesome was actually formed when I worked for Subaru. I worked for Subaru, and Brian McQueen, who's part of Driving While Awesome, mm-hmm. he sent an email to like 10 of our friends. And in short, it said, check out this article in Auto Week magazine about 24 Hours of Lemons, which had 1 race so far. Mm-hmm. And he said, we got to do this thing. And we have to get like, he found this AMC like Javelin or something with a 4-speed and a V8. Nice. And he said, we're not going to do it in some good handling foreign car. We're going to do it in an American car with a 4-speed and rear-wheel drive. And who's in, basically. And I said I was in, and I'm trying to think who else. A couple friends of ours, basically friend of mine, Connor, and a few of Misha, and a few other friends, which aren't on the podcast or anything. But we all said we're in. So we did we ended up buying a Porsche 944, which is the total opposite of what he wanted us to buy. But I think we had the first Porsche in Lemons because we were at the second Lemons ever at Altamont Speedway. And back then, Lemons was basically a destruction derby.
Nice. And
there was like 50 cars or something like that. So this is the second one ever. We started making these like, but we were actually called Team Santa Cruz. I mean, how generic is that? But we just call ourselves Team Santa Cruz. And then the subtext was Driving While Awesome. Our friend Connor coined that phrase, and it kind of stuck. But we went out there, and it was basically a destruction derby. And to get into this race, we made this video basically selling ourselves as an application. And then for every race there, forward, we made these like kind of really fun videos. And the one video went viral. It was of us racing at Altamont, a Subaru hitting us, going on two wheels, us doing pit maneuvers on cars. It was kind of crazy, and it had Jay-Z 99 Problems in the background.
Nice.
And Jalopnik picked it up. This is back in like 2007, and so this is pre-YouTube, or maybe YouTube had just started. But there was no way to monetize anything. So at that time, I think we had like, I don't know, 90,000 views. And we're like, oh my God, this is crazy, but we can't do anything with this. Okay.
Sure.
Well, anyways, so we just kept racing, and we did like 8 races. And then we all started getting married and having families. And we kind of all, people kind of rotated through the Driving While Awesome team. And it just kind of ended after 7 or 8 races. And then 4.5 years ago, we Warren, Brian, and I got together because Brian and I were commuting together up to the Bay Area. He worked at GoPro at the time, and I worked at MA Carbon. And we started doing test podcasts on our commute up there. So we would just put a task cam on the window and record into it and talk a bunch of nonsense. Those have still never been released. But I don't know if they ever will be, because there's a lot of dead time and stuff, dead air. But we decided to do it for real, and we basically bought a cheap Tascam recorder, put it on a table, and started recording. And that was 4.5, almost 5 years ago, and we've never missed a week.
When starting out, was it the same round table as it is today? Because it doesn't sound like it.
No, so when we started out, it was just Warren, Brian, and I. And then Art actually worked at GoPro with Brian, and he came on as a guest. And the way we always say it is that he came on as a guest and he refused to leave.
Okay. That's a tactic, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of like he lived in San Francisco. The rest of us live in Santa Cruz. And he makes the trek down here almost every week to record with us.
Wow. That's dedication.
Yeah, and we don't record until 7:30 usually.
Okay.
So he doesn't, and we record 2 episodes a night, sometimes 3 now with Patreon episodes. So he doesn't leave here until 11 o'clock midnight.
Okay, so let's get into RADwood, because prior to RADwood, there really wasn't a specific kind of cultural event around 80s and 90s cars. You could bring out 80s and 90s cars to any car show and they would probably be well respected, depending, of course, on the kind of car. But there wasn't anything specific that surrounded that era.
It goes pretty deep. I mean, I think our show, Driving While Awesome, the podcast, essentially is always focused on those cars. And it's really just because that's the cars that, I mean, we don't, none of us have really expensive cars, and we don't, I know I got really jaded by high-end supercars and stuff like that working for the Carbon Company. I'd see all this stuff and drive event doors and all this stuff, and they just didn't do it for me. And 4 years ago, I went and bought a 944, which is what we raced in Lemons, and I had one in college. And I kind of went back to basics, and then Warren has an E30. And at the time, I think Brian had an E36 M3, and Art had a E36 M3 maybe, or an M5, E34 M5 or something. But we're always just all about the 80s and 90s cars, and even our Coastal Range Rally, which we've been doing. Actually, I've been working all day trying to plan for the one that we're doing this Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
But that was created out of not having a place for us, not having a place for like 80s and 90s car culture.
Right.
And if you look at all these vintage there's a bunch of vintage rallies, like really cool rallies throughout California. And they all focus on pre-smog cars, so pre-1975. So we created the Coastal Range Rally out of necessity. Like, we need to let in 944s and E30s and all this stuff. And of course, we let in 60s and 70s cars as well, and even 50s and 2000s and kind of everything.
Right.
But So that's kind of like, that was DWA, and DWA was always just pushing. We've always pushed that kind of 80s and 90s analog, yet you can still drive the cars on a daily basis, and they're still somewhat reliable.
Okay.
And then one day on the show, we were talking about, I think, Warren brought up that he would love to do a Goodwood type hill climb at Hearst Castle. So there's a big driveway going into Hearst Castle, and Warren was talking about how cool it would be to have a show that was basically 80s and 90s cars like Goodwood that drives up into Hearst Castle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like total dream, because I mean, at least I think we will never be able to make that happen. But a friend of ours, Bradley Brownell, who used to do the Camden Tub podcast, and he writes for Flat Sixes, and he's a writer for Jalopnik and a bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
He was listening, and we saw him at Canepa Cars and Coffee the next weekend, and he was talking about, that's the greatest idea ever. We should. And then we were standing around a round table, basically. I think it was Warren, Brad, myself, and my brother Travis. And we were bouncing off all these names like Coolwood or, all this stuff. And then came up with RADwood. And basically, RADwood was formed, and it was formed as this little get-together up in San Francisco that we were hoping, we were looking at as almost like more of a Cars and Coffee, but with dress up.
Right.
And we got 150 cars to that first one.
Wow.
And most of the people that came dressed up, and it was kind of like this really cool thing. And then a photographer that was there, just a dude that owns a Camaro, Kurt was, he took some photos and wrote a really cool article, and he sent it to me, and I posted it on our website. And then Jalopnik saw that, and they asked if they could, share it. And I got them in touch with Kurt, and they put it up. And then all of a sudden, it was a thing, basically. It got, I don't know, 500 comments and millions of views. And then it was like, oh shoot, we have to do another one of these. And then it's kind of, that was a year and 3 months ago or so, and now I don't even know, we've done 5, I think, and we're doing our 6th next month. So you did some of the major cities. You did LA, you just recently did Philly. Like where else are you guys trying to do this thing? Yeah, so we've done San Francisco, LA, Atlanta, and then we're doing Philly next month. We're looking at doing England in the next year. Wow. As well as Texas, so probably Austin. And then we're looking at Florida. And then we're kind of doing the rounds again. We want to, I'd love to do like Pacific Northwest. We might do a Midwest one at some point. Mm-hmm. A lot of those people are always yelling at us to do one. But we'll see. It's just like, I know Art would love to do Japan. He did a lot of business travels in Japan and spent tons of time over there, and he loves the car culture over there. So he's definitely pushing for that. So I think it's kind of, the possibilities are endless, but we definitely have a rotation of, I think San Francisco and LA are in our rotation permanently. Right. And then the other ones can kind of change a little bit. Sure. Let's talk about the car culture of the 80s and 90s. RADwood in itself is not necessarily just a car show. You've got people dressing up in neon. Was that a part of the show, or did that just kind of come about? It definitely was. And that's just straight up a play on Goodwood, right? So Goodwood Revival is 50s, 60s, and you have to dress up to go there. Right. So everyone's wearing tweed jackets and the little hats and everything. And that was kind of our play on Goodwood being RADwood. And also it's so cheesy when you really think about it, because, almost, I think the cheesiest thing I could think of is like a Good Guys show or something, right? Where, they're all dressing up 50s and stuff like that, but it's exactly what we're doing, but it's the era that we look back fondly on, right? So I was born in December of 79. So I'm kind of an 80s kid, but I would say, probably more 90s when you really look at it. But I remember, I was super into skateboarding and boogie boarding and surfing, and just grew up with all that stuff, and just kind of, that's what we look back at really fondly, and all the cars that I loved and drew all the time. I would always draw like 944s, and I remember when the 968 came out, I was like, oh my gosh, I want one of those one day,
Yeah.
And now it's kind of like those are the cars we can buy, and we're of that age. And then also we look back fondly at the fluorescence and all the OP and Shark watches and Oakley sunglasses and all that stuff. So it's really fun.
Why do you suppose that cars from the 80s, and we'll say mid 80s and up, because I think that there was a period between 80 and 85 because of the oil crisis and everything like that. The cars, there's a legitimate problem with the cars that were put out, aside from like a couple of exceptions. But after, I would say, mid 80s and up, we saw a big improvement in cars. But for some strange reason, they still didn't get, and they still, I think, to a certain extent today, they still don't get a lot of respect, cars from that era. And many of them were really actually great to drive. If you've ever driven a 60s Roadster or a 60s muscle car, they're great from the outside, but they're terrible to drive. And I feel
really
like in the 80s, cars just became better. I feel like the 80s were the start of actual good, like, mechanical grip and great motors and engine technology and things of that sort. But still, to this day, not a lot of cars get respect from that era. Why do you think that is?
It's really hard. I think that, it's obviously there's a time thing. And I think that also we've been, I'm trying to think, because I think when I was a kid, like 70s cars weren't getting respect. And people were, looking at those as like, oh, that's not a classic. So I think it kind of goes with time.
Sure.
But also, I think it's just that, they don't have it's hard for people to look at them as classic cars, right? Because I think people still associate a classic car as having chrome bumpers and, all that kind of stuff. It's like a V8, chrome bumpers. It's really hard to get past that and think of a 1986 like Datsun or Nissan 300ZX as a classic for a lot of people.
Right.
But I think those people are kind of dying off, and the new breed actually does see them as classics. And I think it is being, like, if you look at Bring a Trailer and stuff, it's like these cars are actually getting some appreciation, and people are spending good money for cars that, 5 years ago you could pick up for $1,500. They're now $8,500 or $10,000.
Right.
But I agree with you on all that stuff. It's just like 80s was a time when fuel injection was like every car had fuel injection essentially, and cars got really drivable and they had good grip. And now also you can make them into good drivers cars. They were good drivers cars anyways, but you slap a good set of tires on them, and this is a test we've always talked about wanting to do, is taking these 80s sports cars and putting modern rubber on them and doing the slalom tests and skid pad numbers. Because I bet they'd do pretty well. I bet they'd gain a good, go from 0.83 to 0.95 or something.
Sure.
So yeah, cars got really good and they got really drivable. So you could actually take these things out and rip on them, and they'll actually they'll reward you. They'll hold up, where a lot of those, like you said, the old American muscle cars and stuff like that, like, they don't really drive that great. You have to do so much to even make them stop or go or anything, and I remember getting in a friend's 71 Boss 302, and it was super cool car, grabber blue, and I get in and I'm like, wow, this thing is not very fast, and it doesn't handle and it doesn't stop. It's just, they're not, and that's part of the reason I think why Porsche 911s have really gone crazy is that you can have you ever driven like a 60s 911 or 70s 911?
I haven't. I've driven a 356, and that was terrifying.
Okay.
But
Yeah. So I mean, it's like a 70s 911 actually drives really well.
yeah,
And it's pretty quick and it handles well. Like those have always been a car that you could rip on and drive fast, and they can compete with they can play with like new stuff, and they can go out, and they're really good. But I think the 80s was when the rest of the car manufacturers kind of caught up, and they could can actually do stuff and work well.
So you worked with a bunch of exotics, and you said that they didn't do anything for you. There's obviously different tastes and different kind of ways of enjoying a car, but modern cars are so capable and so incredibly good that it's hard to not fall in love with a car here and there, although it's very easy to fall out of love with some of them because they're so robotic and so just lacking of character and feeling. Like, I've said this before about McLarens, where I really want to love them, but I don't really love them that much because it's like getting excited about a new MacBook. Why is it for you that modern cars, and you can give us your definition of what modern is. I mean, is it 2005 and up? Is it 2010 and up? Or is it, older than that? Why isn't it that those cars just don't do it for you the way that cars from the 80s and 90s do?
So I think it's like you said, they don't have they almost don't have flaws, and they're too capable.
Mm-hmm.
They have too much grip. They're too fast. Too much everything. Like if you drive it on my favorite back road here in the Santa Cruz Mountains, you're not having fun because you're going like 3/10 in that thing is what me going 8/10 in my 944 is.
Right.
So I'm having a blast because I'm actually feeling the rear end kind of move around, and I'm having to set the front end and do all this stuff. And the 944 is a pretty capable, like good handling car and everything too. But, you drive one of these things, these modern cars, and it's just, they're not fun. You have to drive like a complete, dipshit. And you have to be going speeds, 4 times the speed limit and risking your life, everyone else's life around you to even have fun.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest reason. And they're really boring around town because, I mean, what are you going to do? You're just in first gear all the time because you can't exploit that at all. And if you even step on it in first gear, everyone's going to be yelling at you to slow down. So I'm a total slow car fast advocate. And so when I worked for Subaru, I had a Porsche 928 and I had a Porsche 996. And this was in like 2007. I bought a 996 with like 21,000 miles on it. I think I paid like 34 grand for it at the time or something like that. It was like perfect condition. This is a pre-IMS, like anyone knowing anything about IMS really.
Yeah.
And the 997 had just come out. So it was like, it was kind of like it was a pretty kind of baller car, at the time. But I really liked that car a lot. But even that car, with its 296 horsepower, it's almost like too fast and capable for really driving fast in the hills because you're going way too fast. You're like, if a cop, you're going to get your license taken away. If a deer jumps out in front of you, you're going to hit it. And you have all the traction control and all. I mean, actually, mine was a 99, so it didn't have traction control and stuff, which made it like pretty fun, actually. But it's just they're too fast, too capable, and they just kind of lose a little bit of that specialness. And it's like Cindy Crawford throwing it back, like she was special because she had that mole, right? She had this quirk, and the modern cars are just so perfect at everything. It's almost like that. It's like, who's the most beautiful girl? Like make this make the most beautiful woman in a machine.
Right.
She would just be, it's a robot. It's not a real thing. And I think that's the same thing with these cars. It's just, they don't have that soul, I guess you could say.
Lane, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. I think we're going to talk to all the DWA guys. I think I would love that, just to kind of get the different perspective on things from everybody and get their ideas and how all you guys work together. That'd be super fun to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Lane, with that being said, I would like for you to take the opportunity to let people know of DWA if they haven't heard of you guys yet. It's kind of hard not to hear of you guys. I mean, you guys are pretty much everywhere with RADwood and the podcast. I mean, you guys are putting in the work. Because I think a couple of you guys are now full-time, right?
Yeah, Art and I.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yep.
That's great.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, so please tell people where to find you guys, Instagram. The podcast is obviously pretty much everywhere. It's on iTunes and Google Play, I think, right?
Yeah, podcast is, I guess it's everywhere. I know that I put it up and it kind of goes everywhere. So Stitcher, iTunes, all that stuff, Driving While Awesome podcast. We have a large backlog that people can listen to. I don't recommend starting from the beginning, although a lot of people do. It's pretty embarrassing when they tell me they started from the beginning. Even more embarrassing when they say their wife listens with them or their girlfriend. But yeah, so we have that. And then you can follow us on Instagram at Driving While Awesome, Facebook at Driving While Awesome, drivingwhileawesome.com. And then you can follow RADwood at radwood.org and on Instagram at RADwoodOfficial. Nice. And I think we're everywhere else. You can just kind of Google either Driving While Awesome or RADwood and check us out. And then I'm on Instagram as Lane Skelton. So yeah, you can check that out.
Nice. Yeah, and you guys have a show coming up in Philly. And if you're in Philly, I'm sure this show is actually, when is the show?
The show is October 14th.
October 14th. Okay, so this episode's going to come out before October 14th. So if you're listening and you're in Philly, make sure to contact and look up the DWA guys to get your tickets because you need to go experience. And I say this like I've been to the show, and I haven't, but I feel like in some spiritual way I have. I will. When you guys come back to LA, it is going to happen. I actually had an excuse. I won't say on the air what the excuse is. Or was at least at the time that you guys were in LA, but there will not be an excuse like that or any excuse for that matter for the next show. So I will be coming out to see you guys.
Oh, good.
The Road Stories podcast is recorded, mixed, and produced by Michael Senderovich. Original music is provided by Clarence in the Road Stories project. You can find more music by Clarence by going to soundcloud.com/Clarence Los Angeles. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review. It helps the show greatly. And lastly, please follow the show on social media at RS Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.